Greetings and good Wednesday morning, the 14th of December, 2022, third decade of the 21st century. Once again, if you're new to my channel, I always open up with that preamble to more or less kind of juxtapose where we are and what we're talking about versus where people predicted us to be. Sometimes I get a little socio-political, sometimes I just get a little social, and then other times I really try to nerd out on stuff. But as always, my one faithful viewer who takes the time to respond, Stace Catalan, responded to my last video, and I'm going to do as I always do, read, react, and respond. So I decided not to use my music education degree due to several reasons. One being how certain schools are run. I have worked with educational testing services and have seen that side of the education program as well. A lot of my friends are educators and I have nothing but respect for them and what they have had to endure, whether due to admin or parents, etc. I think one issue is social media, where it has made some people feel entitled to share their attitude online as well as offline, and no one wants to damage egos. There are certain parents that want others, whether school or online, to teach their kids to take responsibility off of them on how their kids turn out. I was whooped once by my stepfather for talking back at a teacher. I had already gotten a spanking at school. That's all it took to get me in line, because I knew I never wanted to experience that again. While in school, my mother was heavily involved. She worked as an administrative assistant at schools and sometimes the school districts as well. I think discipline needs to be a responsibility of parents rather than schools. How they decide to discipline can vary pending on the different methods available. With the education system, it's a damn if you do and damn if you don't, unfortunately. So if you're not up to speed, in my previous video I read, reacted, and responded to Stace's comments, and then I further went on because I remembered Stace had an educational background. I further went on to elaborate about how people in my inner circle are heavily involved in the educational environment. To some weird degree, I am too. I think I'd be labeled as an adult educator, and I get to see the overall product. And I was talking with a coworker yesterday, and he graduated high school in the 80s, where I graduated in the 90s. And Stace, I'd be interested to get your opinion on this. And I apologize again if any of this is repetitive, especially for you, Stace. I was telling my coworker, I feel like for my generation that graduated in the 90s, whether by intelligent design, by coincidence, or by accident, we're the ones directly responsible for opening the doors to topics and concepts that were previously closed. And I'm going to try to do my best to create an analogy for understanding, but I apologize in advance if I destroy it. Essentially, there's always been niche cultures, and frame that however you want. Tattooed, pierced, gay, bisexual, whatever the case may be, there's always been these niche subcultures that always had their safe spaces where they could congregate, where they could partake in one another outside of the norms. I guess people like me would be considered the norms, and even then, by previous standards, I would be considered abnormal. I mean, I'm tattooed, and I have some unique thoughts and opinions on different things. But that being said, I feel like my generation opened the door. And Stace, I don't know if you feel the same way. Like we opened the door to entertaining, normalizing certain concepts. That being said, whether it was us or a generation before us, we're at a point right now where people are overly involved in other people's business, and I think you kind of hinted on that. People are overly involved in other people's businesses. Now, progress is a double-edged sword. In some ways, we progress forward in a positive direction, but at the same time, there's always a consequence for progressing forward. All right? And sometimes you don't know what that consequence is going to be until you experience it. At one point, whether it was a talk television show host, psychiatrist, somebody somewhere eventually, and I could probably do the research and figure that out. Stace, maybe you even know. Somebody came up with the concept that spanking or physical discipline towards a child is considered corporal punishment, and that corporal punishment is bad and overall detrimental and leads to overall bad outcomes for the child, and that the child will most likely end up like John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, so on and so forth. I'm sure somebody did a study on that and spent a lot of time and secured a lot of research grants and whatnot to study specifically convicts in prison to try to determine, what went wrong. When in reality, one of the most interesting and dynamic things about being a human is the ability to just do what you want. I mean, there's consequences, but the freedom to think, feel, and act however the hell you want and do what you want, right or wrong. And I think it's a mistake to try to overly dissect criminals and criminal behavior, like, well, if we could find the root cause, we can stop it. And it's like, no, you have to come to terms with the fact that some people are just bad. They're just bad. They're bad actors. They have bad intentions. That's just who they were going to be, and it's okay. All right, it's not for the people they harmed. It's not good, but it is what it is. So, carrying on with this topic of conversation, I was talking about how with the people I'm involved with, there seems to be a tremendous lack of discipline, and how the parents seem to be relying on the schools to provide the discipline they're unwilling to, with one caveat: there's a fine line. You can raise your voice, you can attempt in any way, shape, or form to enforce some level of discipline as is expected of the public school system, but if you push it too far, as determined by me, the parent, all right, not all parents agree on one standard, but me as the individual parent, I get to determine the individual standard. And I often wonder if a lot of it is, like Stace was talking about, but maybe not in this degree, the ego, where you feel as though you feel embarrassed, you feel an attack against your ego when someone tells you your kid is misbehaved. I don't know. I mean, it sounds plausible. I mean, yeah, why not, right? Who wants to hear that their kid's a bad kid? And I think back in my day, my parents weren't so defensive, but whatever. So I think what we're having is this conflict where I want you to discipline my kid because I won't, but I also get to determine what is an appropriate level for you to discipline and what isn't. And I think that's where we're having this miscommunication, this conflict. Why parents aren't disciplining their kids, I don't know. Because some of the stories I hear, some of these kids are not what I would call exceptional needs. What they are is lacking in discipline. And pardon my language, but they need an ass whooping. Some of these kids need a good old-fashioned ass whooping. Stace even mentioned it. She got her ass whooped, and it was like, okay, that was not pleasant. That was not something I want to relive again. And she learned her lesson and did her level best not to do that again. So you could take many different things from this. Whether or not kids these days are missing discipline, whether we are raising a generation of unreliant, as in we're raising a generation of children that have zero self-reliance, zero self-accountability, that they're going to struggle horrifically in the real world. And I got to tell you, doing what I do for a living, I deal with military personnel separating from the service, and I am inundated with individuals getting out of the service that I just, thank God boot camp is so spoon-fed that the drill instructor is there to tell you everything to do. Because some of these kids, it's getting worse. They literally want everything spoon-fed to them because apparently it's always been spoon-fed to them. I don't know. And I don't know if maybe it was my generation that opened the door to entertaining these different concepts. I know when I was younger, and Stace, I don't know if you experienced the same thing down in Texas. We used to have a segregation for behavioral disorder. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't have a physical handicap. You don't have a mental handicap. You just can't behave. You're just an ill-behaved kid. And the system still has to deal with you until you have disciplined your way out of the system, whether into juvenile detention or if you reach the point where you can be detained with adults. And there used to be consequences. There used to be I don't want to say zero tolerance, but less tolerance than what we have now. And I don't think when I was growing up anybody cared about immutable characteristics. If you were a bad behaved kid, nobody cared about your ethnicity. Nobody cared about, well, it's a single mother trying to... No, it's like, no excuses. All right? You have the conscious ability to behave or misbehave. All right? Whether you have a positive, nurturing background or a less than positive, nurturing background, you have the physical capacity to make the decision to behave or misbehave in school. And we segregated the misbehaved kids until they misbehaved so badly that they were invited to leave. Sometimes that involved incarceration, like I said, whether juvenile or adult detention, depending on age. And by the time I had kids, there's been this thing all about inclusion. And it's a wonderful idea in concept. It probably looks really, really good on paper. It sounds wonderful on the ears. And I understand the concept. As a parent of a former special needs child, I understand the intent behind it. Rather than when I was younger, kids with specific physical handicaps, kids with specific mental handicaps, they couldn't go to the public schools. At least if they did, I don't recall ever seeing them. The only exception is, I think, maybe blind and deaf. I think when I was in high school, we had one blind kid, and he had some special considerations. Usually a student volunteer would help him get to class, help him with his locker, help him with his books. But otherwise, he did everything else. And he was just blind, and that was it. We did have some students with some other challenges, but nothing that would have prevented them from going to regular school. 2 of those students did eventually die before we graduated high school, apparently. I'd have to go back and look. In my yearbook, we have 2 female students that apparently passed away and were memorialized in my yearbook, and I feel like I don't remember that happening. Ironically, I didn't get my senior high school yearbook until the day I shipped off to boot camp, so let's leave it at that. I understand the need, and I also feel like there's been this overwhelming desire to diagnose. And I don't know if I'm at an age where I'm exposed to more information, or if we're at an age in life where more information is made available, but autism didn't seem to be as popular. Autism didn't seem to be as frequent as it seems now. I mean, here where I live, we probably average between 5 to 6 autistic kids in the elementary school, between 5 to 6 autistic kids in the middle school, and possibly 5 to 6 autistic kids in the high schools. And we have multiple elementary schools, we have multiple middle schools, and we have multiple high schools. I don't remember autism being that prevalent. And I understand that when it comes to autism, there's a wide spectrum between severe and less severe. But when I was younger, I don't remember it being so prevalent. It very well may be more prevalent, and there very well may be reasons for it. Once again, progress producing an unforeseen consequence. Some people like to talk about food preservation products having detrimental effects. It's all possible. But I'm very curious for anybody to provide their feedback. And Stace, I always welcome your feedback. Are there unforeseen consequences to progress? Can we potentially progress to a point where it's detrimental? Can progress be detrimental? Are we doing a disservice to children? I'm very curious to get your thoughts and opinions on that, Stace. And anybody else who takes the time to watch this and respond, I greatly appreciate it. The premises of my channel is we don't have to agree. but we can demonstrate to everybody else that we can be kind, humane, and civil to one another and still disagree, and yet be like, yeah, cool, you know, you see things differently, that's fine. And I think the demonstration here too is that we're not trying to go out of our way to adversely affect others is the other point. So with that in mind, Stace, if you're interested, I'm going to try to put out a couple more videos today, because I know there's been like these long breaks in between videos. So I'm going to try and get a couple other videos. Hopefully you'll like those. It'll provide you some content to respond to. And for anybody else that watches and responds, I greatly appreciate it, and you're awesome. Till next time.